Welcome back to Unlocking the Paranormal. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Carrie. And if this is your first time joining me, I do appreciate you checking out the show. This is actually the third installment of the Spooky Summer series, where summer adventure meets the supernatural and every getaway becomes a ghost story. Now, some of these stories aren't necessarily just family vacations, but every single one of them will take place in a hotel or a haunted cabin, and it could also take place while camping or outdoors. Now, I scoured the internet and I looked for some of the creepiest stories that I could find. And let me tell you, these stories do not disappoint. So, last week we explored a few different locations, and each of the stories were equally terrifying. If you have not listened, I really encourage you to go check those out, as well as the first Spooky Summer Series episode, if you have not listened to that one as well. I actually talked about one of the more terrifying things you ever can encounter, I think, with the paranormal, and that is shadow figures. So, if you have not listened to those episodes, I definitely encourage you to go check them out. But today, the journey continues with even more unsettling stories from places people visit to relax, escape, and make memories. So, settle in to episode 3 of the Spooky Summer series. This first story actually comes from a user from Reddit. The username is Waldo Jeffers65, and this was posted about 6 years ago on our paranormal. The first story comes from a man whose wife once worked at a bed and breakfast in Ecuador, the very place where the two of them first met. The property had a long standing reputation for being haunted, though he says he never experienced anything strange himself during the many times that he stayed there. That said, guests and staff reported enough unsettling incidents over the years to keep the rumors alive. He stated that one time they were staying there with a large group. His sister and her friends were assigned a room toward the back of the property. The next morning, they asked his wife if the man staying in the room next to theirs was all right, because they had heard him crying and vomiting throughout the night. His wife explained that there was no one staying in any of the rooms near them. In fact, theirs was the only occupied room in that section, as the surrounding rooms were undergoing renovations. Could it have been someone snuck into the room and was staying the night there? Perhaps one of the people that was doing the reservations and they knew that it would be empty. Who's to say? But it still is just really, really odd. And once you start hearing some of these other stories I'm going to get into, you're going to quickly start to see that perhaps it really truly is something paranormal. The second story that he shared was that the back of the property featured a courtyard surrounded by guest rooms. Each of the doors and windows opened towards the center. Over the years, multiple guests asked staff about a woman they had seen wandering through the courtyard at night, stopping to peer into their windows. The unsettling part was that no employee knew who they were describing. So now we have a creepy woman peering into windows at night from the courtyard, and they're unable to locate this woman or find this woman. That's definitely unsettling, and I think it goes without saying that I am siding on the paranormal here, and I definitely think that there's something odd about seeing a random woman roaming around and have it be something that multiple guests are constantly asking about. And those were only a couple of the stories connected to this place. In the next episode, I'm going to be sharing an even stranger account from the same property, one that left far fewer questions about whether something unusual was happening there. Let's get into the main story of the evening, the haunted cabin. Now, this was actually posted on Our Ghosts by manifest_decimation, and they titled it Haunted Cabin. And this is how the story goes. My fiance and I stayed in a cabin near the Smoky Mountains this past Saturday night for a quick getaway. I think it may have been haunted. Would love to hear what you all think. Here's what happened. We got to the cabin around 7 p.m. Saturday. She got an off feeling when we pulled up and wanted to check out the place before we brought her stuff in, though I didn't know this was the reason at the time. Neither of us mentioned it to the other at the time, but we both felt something was a little off. It wasn't totally comfortable to be in that space. It felt at times like we were being watched. We both chalked it up to being in a remote area in a cabin with so many windows without blinds or curtains. We were also sleeping in a loft that was pretty visible through the three sets of windows. We chilled in the hot tub that night after dinner. Both of us kept stealing glances inside for some reason, but still hadn't mentioned anything to one another. I kept worrying about who or what might be in the dark just beyond my field of vision in the woods. Again, kept chalking it up to having read too much Stephen King. I found out later that she swept through the cabin while I was covering the hot tub back up because she had an uneasy feeling like someone was in the cabin. Later, when we went to bed, she was more anxious than I've ever seen her. She is intuitive as hell, so I was getting spooked too. She didn't want to freak me out with the ghost stuff, so she only mentioned out loud something about worrying about someone breaking in. I started dozing in and out eventually, and all of a sudden, she was sitting up, shining her phone's flashlight towards the wall and couch opposite the bed. At the time, she said she had spooked herself looking at the stacked pillows. She told me later she thought she saw something over there watching us. We dozed back off. She wakes up drenched in sweat, but goes back to sleep. Around 3:30 a.m., we're woken by the loft's fire alarm. It beeps loudly, 3-4 times over the course of maybe 5 to 10 seconds at most, before abruptly stopping on its own. The kitchen smoke alarm doesn't go off. We hop up, get dressed, and start turning on the lights to see if we see smoke. No smoke at all. But we both smell a distinct burnt smell, like that of electrical wires that are beginning to melt. The smell goes away within 5 minutes of us being awake. Can't find any source of the smell, and it never returns. My original thought, when the alarm woke us up, was that someone was trying to lure us out of the house. I'd felt so uneasy and so watched since we got there. We turned on the outside lights and peeked out. No one that we can see. I'm starting to think this might be supernatural at this point, but don't want to freak her or myself out any more than we already were. Nothing else happened, but we both felt watched and uneasy the rest of the night. We stayed awake, packed our stuff, and waited out the rest of the night downstairs. There were a few creaks and other noises, but I know cabins tend to creak a good bit since they're made of wood. I was sitting to where I could see the loft, and I couldn't shake the feeling of something being up there. We got the hell out of there as soon as there was enough daylight to see the surroundings while packing the car. We later looked back at the pictures of the loft and found the reflections of two figures in a couple of pictures. Now, unfortunately, the photos were no longer connected to this post, so I'm not able to share them on my social media, but I don't doubt that there probably was a couple of weird figures in the pictures. Now, I definitely can understand why people thinking that getting the unsettling feeling of being watched as being connected to the paranormal, because a lot of times people do tend to report feeling that way in notoriously haunted locations. But what's the truth behind it? Is it truly haunted simply because you feel that way? Or are you just creeping yourself out? Now, because the last couple of stories were on the shorter side, I decided I'm actually going to be sharing an additional story in today's episode. Even though these are meant to be mini episodes, I still wanted to share one additional story today. So settle in. This next story comes from our paranormal. It was shared about 2 years ago from Dragonfly 715, and it's titled Haunted Airbnb. Do I say anything? Question mark. And this is what they write. My daughter and I just came home from our trip to Virginia where we booked an Airbnb for 6 nights. We left after the third night. The host had the typical Southern hospitality personality, but something was off that first night. The door code used was a string of 7 numbers that she had memorized, but was nearly impossible for me to remember. I ended up locking ourselves out upon arrival and unloading, and had to walk over to the host home to request the code again. She welcomed us into our home and then begun asking questions. However, she let it be known that the questions were directed at my daughter, who is 8, and I should remain silent. That set off alarm bells there. Also, upon arrival, the host had mentioned that we should close the curtains to the house, even though it's a safe place because we are 2 girls. Mind you, there were no other homes around us. It was a huge private property. We walked back over to where we were staying and re entered the premise. The first night, I kept hearing what sounded like a large bug with a hard shell continuously fly into the mini split in the bedroom. However, after 18 hours of travel, I was too tired to care. The second night was a different story. The bathroom attached to the room on the second floor kept having a metallic tinkering noise while we were in bed. My daughter thankfully slept through it. However, I kept experiencing anxiety and feeling unsettled. I tried to tell myself I was just exhausted and feeling anxious about traveling. During the 2 days we came and left, a fan I left on was turned off every time we arrived back. There was a small extendable mirror, the only mirror, in the bathroom that one could also tilt up and down. The mirror kept being tilted down towards a child's level. I assumed it was my daughter until I tilted it back up the final day there. I went downstairs to where my daughter was coloring and came back upstairs to it tilted again. Finally, the third night was the last straw. After feeling those prior days that we were constantly being watched, my daughter went to take a shower and said to me, I'm closing the bathroom doors so the lightning bugs can't watch me. My daughter is very extroverted and attached to me. She never wants the bathroom door closed when showering. This let me know she too felt something, but didn't have the words to explain it. We finally went to bed and fell asleep fast. However, I once again couldn't sleep because of anxiety and began experiencing panic attacks, which I am not prone to. Then the noises began, only worse than the prior 2 nights. The metallic tinkering noise in the bathroom grew louder and faster. I tried to tell myself it was a mouse. However, I slept in cabins with mice, and they leave droppings, make squeaks, and you can hear them scurry. None of that happened. Then I heard what sounded like someone tinkering with the items left on the bathroom counter. It sounded like they dropped a glass. Next, I heard the closet door across from the bed open, but my suitcases were in the way, and I heard the door hit them. These noises went on for hours. Everything inside me told me to run, protect my daughter, and get out ASAP. The next morning, I went into the bathroom, and there were child's muddy footprints coming out of the shower and onto a white towel laid in front of the shower. It was not there the night before. I tried to explain it away, but I couldn't. My daughter had not played in any mud on any of those days. And even if she had, there would have been muddy footprints from the front door where we took our shoes off. I immediately began packing our bags to never return again. After 2 nights of not returning, the host messaged me and offered me an additional night free on her. Obviously, I declined. Do I mention anything to the host? Do I leave a review? It took me several days to shake the feeling of this experience. It was so scary that I may never stay in an Airbnb again. So, this story is very similar to the last story where you're really just kind of left questioning almost your sanity, right? Like, are you just making things up in your head by freaking yourself out and making you think that you're being watched? Or is there truly a presence in the room with you? But a few things about the story actually stand out to me. First is the host insisting that all the questions be directed at the 8-year-old while telling the mother to remain silent. That's just a really strange request. Now, I understand, you know, maybe the host was just trying to be friendly with the child to make the mom feel better. Maybe the host just really loves children. I have neighbors myself, and one of them loves children. And whenever we're walking by on walks, she always stops to chat with us. And she always talks with my daughter, and I don't think there's anything weird there. So maybe it was something as innocent as that. But when you take that into account with the additional things that they were experiencing, such as the muddy footprints that came out of the shower, I'm starting to think that there's something more going on here. And this almost starts off as like a classic haunting where at first it's just little noises that make you assume are natural and you choose to ignore it. Although you still are creeped out and have this creepy feeling of being watched, you choose to ignore it and say, nope, there's some kind of rational explanation. Things start out small and then they gradually build. Honestly, that's something you'll hear over and over again in stories like this. It's rarely one dramatic event that convinces someone that something is wrong or paranormal. It's typically dozens of small things that slowly build into a feeling that something isn't right. Maybe there are perfectly rational explanations for some of those strange sounds and even maybe some of these unsettling feelings, but that is for you all to decide. I would love to hear your thoughts on each of these stories. And if you've ever experienced something strange while traveling, whether at a hotel, an Airbnb, or a cabin, or even while camping, I would love to hear the stories. You can share your story by emailing unlockingtheparanormalpod@gmail.com or by calling the Haunt Line. The phone number for the hotline will be in the show notes if you would prefer to leave a voicemail. And who knows, you might even hear it featured in a future episode of the Spooky Summer series. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss a new deep dive into the paranormal. I have full length episodes that will be coming out later this fall. I've got a really good mix of some of the more bizarre paranormal stories that I've covered, and I cannot wait for you all to hear them. And be sure to check out my social media for additional creepy content. I am on TikTok, Instagram, as well as Facebook. Don't forget to come back here next week for the next installment of the spooky summer series. Next week's episode, we actually switch gears a little bit. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to Unlocking the Paranormal. And as always, stay curious.